Okay, so we can see that we have created local storage part and remote data access. So now is the time to create repository, and repository is something which basically decides whether we will fetch the data from local storage or we will send API request. We'll create new package named repositories. We'll create class called picture items repository. So now in here we will need two data sources. Okay, so first one is database, but first one is local database, but database that we previously created, we need to make it public so that we can access it in here. Okay, we can call it local storage. And the second is remote data access. We can just call it remote. So we will pass those via constructor, and we will have public void get all picture items, or just get picture items. So in here we decide whether we send API request or we basically just retrieve the data from local storage. So what I suggest in this case is to fetch the data from local storage anyway, and later, if the API call request was successful, we just update our UI with those items. So, you know, also when you open Instagram, you firstly see offline feed, and then after a few seconds, you just see refresh the data. So basically, we will do something similar in here as well. So now we will here say local storage dot get data access object dot get all picture items, right? We'll store this into a list of picture item entity. Okay. We can name this local items, right? So now is a question, how do we actually pass this data to the UI, or in our case, it's a view model. It's not created yet, but we will somehow need to pass the data from repository once the data is fetched to view model. So now is the time to introduce third object type, which will be similar to our data transfer object as well as to the entity object, and it will be called model. So we will create new package model. Inside it we'll create picture item, but this time no extension, so no entity and no data transfer object. And this will have exact the same fields as other two. So why do we have this one? Well, this will be the object that UI will operate with. So this object will basically be data holder for something that will be displayed on UI. So if you need to modify this, there is no problem. We are not modifying our original object that came from the database. We're just modifying this model UI object, let's say. So this is a good practice because let's say that we have some kind of object that can be modified. So what if this is carrier of some user data and user changes profile image, for example? So now we can't modify profile image of our data transfer object, for example, because it's not practically legal. It's something that image of the backend object. So we would modify our model which is only on UI layer. And then if we want to update server, we will need to do remapping. So now, how do we actually get to this object that we have just created in here from our repository and from basically entity object in this situation, because we have entity items? So we will need to use mappers. So we need some helper, let's say, that will map entity to our model object, so that from here UI can proceed its own operations and stuff with that model object. So we will also recap this at the end, so don't worry if you didn't figure it out at the moment. So we will create a new package. We will call it mapper, new class, which will actually be interface, object mapper. So we will say that this interface will accept type T and model. So this T will represent entity or data transfer object. So now we will have two methods. First one will return model. So we'll call it toModel, because we will pass our entity or transfer object and get it converted to model. Second will be from model. So we want to get our transfer object or entity object. And also what we want to get list of those objects from list of models, as well as for this situation in here. So since we are working with lists now, those two will be quite helpful. Okay, so now we will need actual implementation of this, so we will call it picture item entity mapper, which will implement object mapper. So in terms of item entity mapper, we will have picture item entity as an object that needs to be mapped to model object, and model objects, we know that it is picture item. So now we can implement those methods. So how will basically mapping be executed when we want to get model from entity? So we will simply say return new picture item from object.getID. Let me check if second is author or not. Okay, it is. Okay, so that's the way. Now in this case, we will basically return entity from. So it seems that we didn't put getters and setters in here, so let's add them. Let me check. Okay, that's the way. So now how to map list of objects to another list of objects. So we'll use streams and we will say list of picture item dot stream dot map. We say this from model, because we want to basically call from a model method on each picture item object in here, so that we can get picture item entity, and then we collect this to list. So basically what will happen, it will iterate over each item internally, and it will call from model so that we get brand new list with picture item entity objects. We do pretty similar in here, just we don't say from model, but we say to model, and that's it. What can we also do is to make this a singleton. And we have private static final picture item entity instance equal to new picture item entity mapper. We need that, and we need get instance. So now if we go back to our repository, we would just say local items dot, no, actually we will need to access our entity mapper, so we will need it here as well. Like so. We will need it as our parameter as well. So now we quickly add it. So now in here, when we want to push our model objects, we just say local, we just say basically entity mapper dot to model, and we use one with list, and we push our local items in here. So this will return list of picture items. So to get it to the view model, we need some kind of callback, because get picture items is void method. When it get calls from view model to pass this list to the view model, we need to do it through callback. So how we do that? We create some async task, let's say receiver. We say that it accepts type T. We will see later. We need to rename it. And we will have two methods. So this will be interface, because it will be called, we don't need instance actually of this. We have on success, where this T will be returned, and we will have on failure, where throwable will be returned for now. We might modify this later. So then when view model calls get picture items, it will pass this receiver, and it will require list of picture items, and then we would here say just callback dot on success, and we pass our list of model objects. So now after this, we said that we anyway want to fire API call. We say remote dot get data access object that get picture items, but we see that it returns call. So now type which is required in here is call list picture item DTO. Now we say call in queue. Now on response we can say callback. We refer to this one here, dot on success, And we now need to pass a list of model objects, but we also need another mapper, right? Because now we need to map model object from our data transfer object, which comes from the server. So we'll need another mapper. So we'll create pretty similar to this one. It will be called picture item DTO mapper. It also implements object mapper. But now we don't have entity in here, but we have data transfer object. And we also have our picture item as model item. Okay, so we want to return a new picture item where we pass ID, author, and image URL. Let me check what's going on in here. So we need to call, yes, this one doesn't have a constructor. So we will need to use setters. So we will now to manually set those fields. Okay, and for the list part, we'll just copy this. Here it will be the same, but also to model instead of from. We need to make this singleton. Private constructor. And we need to get instance. Right, so now we go back to our repository. We now add this new mapper. Okay. We can now split it like this. And in here we say DTO mapper dot to model. And we pass the response, but it's better to firstly check if response body is not equal to null, and if response body is not empty. So we then pass it like this. Otherwise we say callback dot on failure if viewModel wants to listen for the errors. So now we got this repository thing ready for viewModel. Actually there is something something more that needs to be done, but we will do that later. So now let's create view model. First we will make package. This package needs to be in root package, not in room. So I need to create it in here. We will call it picture item view model. It will extend Android view model because we will need to access context later. You will see it needs constructor. We will need method which will say get pictures. We will have live data in here. I should have done that firstly. And it will hold a list of picture items. Like this. So instead of void, we will return live data of list of picture items. So we're returning live data instead of mutable because we don't want our activity to be able to modify this data. So only view model can modify this thing. So we are going by the principle of single source of truth. So UI is only there to use the data that comes, not to modify it. And now, okay, so we need to call it like this, but to request actually data, we'll say request picture items. And from here we need to refer to our repository. So I will here declare our repository. Actually, we want to create it once view model is created, but we will need to provide local storage, which is database get instance. So this is why we need Android view model. We need to pass context. Now we need our remote data access, and we need our mappers. So firstly this one, and then DTO mapper. So I forgot to declare this as static. So errors are gone. And now we can simply say repository dot get picture items, and we pass this callback. So we put it here as anonymous implementation, and once we got result from here, it will be triggered on success. It will receive list, and basically if we see implementation of this, we see that it is on view model. So from here we can simply say items live data dot post value result, and that's how UI got that's how basically view model gets a result, and then UI, which will be listening for live data changes, will also receive that. So if we now go in main activity, we can delete this. We can say picture item view model. Then we instantiate it in here. new view model provider, we need lifecycle owner, and we say get name of the view model class. Then we simply say we want to observe live data here, and after that we want to request our items. So here we will add log that will print out items that we have, and it will say got it in main activity, so that we can know that where this log was fired from. Okay, so let me check this once again. Okay, so here is a bit tricky part. So what we're doing here is we are accessing our local storage on UI thread, and by default our app will crash when we do that. So to prevent this, I suggest this only in test mode, so we want to test whether this works or not. We can find our database, and we can here add allow main thread queries. So in this way our app won't crash, but it's only for test purpose to see whether will this work or not. So let's run the app to verify. Let's see what will happen. Okay, so here it's complaining that private string mustn't be null. So we can annotate this as well. So room database wants to be sure that ID is not null because we didn't specify how to generate true, if you remember. So now you see that we got our result in main activity. So at first you see that we got it actually twice. So first time it was empty because we were trying to retrieve it from the local storage, you see here, and we didn't have saved items yet. But after that we sent real items when they came. So now what we want to do is we want to save those items in local storage once they get received, and we will say local storage dot, let me check how did we, okay, so we need data access object, get data access object, and save all items. But we will need to save them as entities, and here we are getting them as data transfer objects. So what we will do now is that we will add local variable in here, so we'll have list of product items like this, so that we can easily remap it to entity, because you know that we have entity mapper which can convert model objects to entity objects that are suiting our room database. So now if we run the app, we also got empty result in here. But if we run it second time, okay, well, let me clear lock it. If we run it all over again, you can see that we got items even first time, because here we saved those items after successful API request, and then when we launched app second time, we had those items returned from local storage. So we will end this lecture in here. In the next one, we will see how to properly handle local storage fetching, because this is currently done on UI thread, which is wrong. So see you then.